Hello, Brovs. We're back with Anyone's Son, a true story by Roberta Roche with Harry de la Roche Jr. We're in the final 50 pages, I think. This is chapter 12, maybe 11. Doesn't matter. Section 36. Before the lawyer's summations, the morning proceedings opened with a discussion of the items offered into evidence. Whatever was in that category would be sent into the jury room for the jury's deliberations. John objected strenuously to not having family letters admitted, but the judge ruled they couldn't go in. At the final tally, the state had a total of 144 items that were marked for identification or offered into evidence. Of this total, 112 were earmarked evidence and available to the jury. The defense had a total of 67 items, 28 of which were offered into evidence. John began his summation a little before 11 a.m. Both he and Mr. Salkin were wearing vested suits, and as they presented their summations, both of them gave emotional pleas. John for acquittal on the grounds of insanity, and Salkin for conviction for 4 counts of first-degree murder. I didn't look at the jury or the lawyers during the summations. Instead, and my child starts texting me. Instead, I either kept my head lowered or stared at the door behind the judge's bench. As I listened, it seemed that my whole life was under a microscope. John spoke for 94 minutes directly to the jury, and sometimes his voice became so soft only the jury could hear it. He pictured me as a dazed psychotic who couldn't sense right from wrong on November 28th. And as he paced in front of the jury, he said I was sick and in need of help. He mentioned my life at the Citadel and my desire to quit, and declared I had lived in 2 private hells. 1, the hell at the Citadel, and 2, the hell of not being able to talk to my father. Speaking of hell, imagine being sequestered for a trial, and then in the closing statements, the defense attorney spoke for 90 minutes. Then the clock ticks, and it is almost time to return to his hell, said John. The pressure cooker builds. Harry comes home, and he sat there with the gun. He walked back and forth in his parents' bedroom, and he finally screams out, I can't go back. And then Harry starts firing the weapon, and his family is gone. A rational boy, he told the jury. Could have said, Pop, I'm not going back. The prosecution would have you believe the plan for the slaying started at the Citadel, he continued. Can you reasonably believe Harry thought out the plans? The whole thing is bizarre. It should not have happened. I don't know how pressure builds up in a boy, but it did. Later, John asserted that when the police began to question me 2.5 hours after my parents and Eric were dead, I was a sick boy. A boy who we know had either shot and killed 1 person or 4. He was psychotic, John stated. You can't tell me that anyone who killed his family is not mentally insane. Next, he went on to stress again that my initial confession to all 4 murders came only after the police had isolated me from my aunt, uncle, and minister and placed me under severe interrogation. When he talked about secreting the pistol, taking Ronnie to the attic and dragging my father from his bed, he added, Can you think of a more feeble, more stupid, more inconsistent, and more insane act? This was deranged, psychotic. Dr. Galena told you that Harry could shut out things to make believe it never happened, but the story Harry told you is one he truly believes. You must make a judgment as to which statement is correct or incorrect, or whether you believe them at all. Toward the end of his summation, John said to the jury, in a voice that was close to a whisper, Is anybody concerned for Harry at this time? He was mentally, medically, and legally insane. But he can be salvaged, he pleaded in almost inaudible tones. Well, now there may be a future for Harry de la Roche Jr. When he finished, John said he felt so much emotion he was close to tears. But as usual, most people commented that I showed no emotion. They didn't know how I felt, though, while I listened to the summations on which so much depended. Mr. Salkin began his 30-minute summation by agreeing that I was sick and in need, but contending I'd weighed the four murders. Of course he's sick, he stated. You'd have to be sick to do what he did. You may think he needs hospitalization. You may think he's crazy, but that doesn't mean he's legally insane. As he half sat on the counsel table in front of the jury box, he told the jurors in a low voice, "This is a classic example of first-degree murder. The defense would have you put the Citadel on trial. The defense would have you put Harry Sr. and Mrs. de la Roche on trial. The defense would have you put Ronald on trial. There is only one person the defense would keep you from trying, and that person is the defendant." He stood up and talked louder and angrier while waving the 21-page confession and reading excerpts from it. "If anything, Mr. de la Roche is not out of touch with reality," he declared. "If he was, he could not have given this statement. It tells us what he was thinking. That's the key word, what he was thinking. He knew what was going on when he was doing it. You don't come up with details like this unless you were there. What he did subsequent to the murders is indicative of knowing. He said he switched bodies and hid the gun twice. These are thought processes." Next, Mr. Salkin called the defense's position about psychosis a desperate gamble and likened it to watching a Charlie Chan movie and having someone turn abruptly to medical center on TV. He described it as an 11th hour psychosis that was right next to the 11th bullet John was looking for. If there was a psychosis, was it a secret, an afterthought, an attempt to pull the chestnut out of the fire, an attempt to rally when all else has failed? When they couldn't prove it was Ronald, he demanded. "You're too intelligent, too sophisticated, and have too much common sense to fall for an 11th hour psychosis," he asserted, charging again that if Dr. Galena felt I was suffering from a psychosis, he should have put statements to that effect in his August 1977 report. You don't turn psychosis on and off like a water faucet. By the time the prosecutor asked the jury to return 4 first-degree murder verdicts, he had succeeded in portraying me as a cunning killer and as an accomplished liar. But despite his damaging effects on my case, Mr. Salkin's summation was good. His last time was powerful and dramatic. "Don't let the truth become Harry de la Roche's 5th victim," he shouted to the jurors. Before the jurors got the case, they listened to an hour and 15 minutes charge in which Judge Madden spoke loudly, clearly, and rapidly. While explaining the law and the insanity defense, he kept his robe zipped as he started the charge, but 10 minutes into the charge, he unzipped his robe for comfort, as he so often did. He began the charge at 2:45 and announced that before a final jury of 12 people retired for deliberation, all 16 jurors' cards would be put in the lottery barrel. The 4 jurors whose cards were pulled out would become the alternates and be excused from deliberating. They'd sit by the side of the jury box whenever court was in session. Outside of court, they'd be sequestered in another room and not permitted to discuss the case. As he continued instructing the jurors, he informed them that during deliberation, they could only ask questions about the law. After they reached the verdict and returned to court, the forelady, Mrs. Althouse, would rise and read the verdict. While outlining the law, the judge gave the jury a choice of 4 verdicts. Under the current law in New Jersey, murder in the first degree is deliberate, willful, and premeditated, he said. It is murder with intent to kill, and premeditation can be only a few seconds. It carries a mandatory life sentence. Murder in the second degree is without deliberation and includes all kinds that are not first degree. It carries a maximum 30-year sentence. The other 2 choices Judge Madden outlined were acquittal by reason of insanity, which was what we were going for, or complete innocence in 3 of the slayings, because I admitted on the stand to shooting Ronnie. The jury in that slaying could acquit me only on insanity. In explaining legal insanity and the insanity defense, Judge Madden pointed out, as he had said earlier, that to be acquitted for reason of insanity, I must have been unaware of the quality of my acts and unable to perceive right from wrong. He told the jury in the crowded courtroom that if the verdict were not guilty by reason of insanity, there would be a hearing on insanity to determine my personal mental status and to see what should be done. The decision could range from a commitment to a mental hospital to an unconditional release. He added that if the defense of insanity was sufficiently established, the law allowed acquittal of all criminal responsibility. When it was time to choose the alternates, a sheriff's officer pulled out 4 names and handed them to the court clerk to read. We lost 3 women and 1 man. The alternates were Cheryl Anizek, the 20-year-old girl with the long straight hair, who was the youngest juror; Dorothy Crum, the middle-aged housewife who had lost a son; Joyce Say, the black-haired second-grade teacher; and Anthony Skokowski, a middle-aged supervisor from Camden. The jurors went to the jury room at 4:45 p.m., and I was returned to my suicide watch cell. John was not optimistic. He said he expected a guilty verdict and that I should expect that too. For all intents and purposes, the case was destroyed the day the confession was allowed into evidence, he told me, giving me another of his supportive pats. I was aware that prospects were dim as I sat in my cell and waited, but some of the mail I got during the trial helped keep me going. I pulled out the top 2 letters from my paper bag, full of mail. The first came from South Carolina from a stranger named Chris. Dear Harry, I felt I had the right. For many days I've had your situation on my mind. I seriously do believe your story, even if no one else will, and I hope you will have a happier future than you've endured this past year. Best of luck. I'm thinking the best thoughts for you, and take it easy. The second was from another stranger. Dear Harry, you do not know me. We have never met. And yet there's a sense in which I know you, one human sensing and feeling and understanding another human in his suffering and confusion and deep hurt. In that sense, I write because feeling these things for you, I had to let you know. There are many who feel deeply for you, and maybe that knowledge can help you just a little. You do not have to feel entirely alone. We can understand the pain a young person feels in reaching maturity in a cold and callous and seemingly indifferent world. We can understand the troubled teenager. We have once been young people ourselves, and we have children your own age, who have known many of the confusions and hurts you have known. You are so young, Harry. Life can be good again. There is hope in the world. Even though there is little justice, you have still to know the quiet yet profound happiness life can bring. I pray for you, dear Harry, a friend. Pastor Immendorf came to see me while I was sitting alone, and I'll never forget his kindness in spending the evening with me. Together we sat in that cluttered cell and watched the Newlywed Game, plus other TV programs, till we were called to the courtroom at exactly 8:15. I wondered if the verdict was in, as the pastor and I went to the courtroom, where Aunt Arden and a few other people were waiting for a verdict. Uncle John had to leave to go to a company annual meeting. Instead of a verdict, the jurors had a question about the law, and they wanted Judge Madden to redefine first and second-degree murder and re-explain the meaning of legal insanity. They also wanted to see Dr. Gleaner's report of August 1977. The judge said he'd redefine the laws promptly at 9 a.m. Then he recessed the court for the night, and the 7-man, 5-women jury was bussed back to the motel. When the jury came in Thursday morning, Pastor Immendorf, Tink Thompson, Aunt Arden, Steve Madriperla, Jack Looney, and spectators were scattered in their seats. I noticed none of the jurors seemed able to look at me as Judge Madden gave them a redefinition of first and second-degree murder. For a verdict of legal insanity or not guilty by reason of insanity, he said for the second time around, that the defense must prove by a preponderance of evidence that I was laboring under such a disease of the mind that I did not know the nature and quality of the act I was doing, or that, if I did know, I did not know the difference between right and wrong. since Dr. Galena's August 1977 report had not been offered into evidence, the jurors could not take it into the jury room. Before I went back to the suicide watch cell, I asked John to try to arrange things so Aunt Arden, my godfather, and a few other people could come to the cell to see me while we waited for the jury's verdict. John spoke to Undersheriff Stas, who said I could see a few of the persons who visited me regularly. Aunt Arden was the first one to come, and we talked about the trial. She also promised she'd see me after the verdict was in. Steve Madriperla came in next, and our visit wasn't very much different from the other times we had talked. I think the people who saw me while the jury was out hoped that they could get close to me and talk about how I felt, but I couldn't let go and do that. And when they were ready to leave, I avoided any kind of goodbye by saying they'd have to excuse me while I left to go to the bathroom. Pastor Immendorf was the last to come in since he planned to stay in the cell with me until I was called for the verdict. While we waited, he read the Bible to me, a few verses from Ephesians, and then he particularly discussed, "For by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God." And that is the end of chapter 12. The verdict, which I think we already know since he went to prison. And everybody knew he was going to prison, is next. That's all. Goodbye, bruv. Goodbye.